So welcome back to another episode of the Python People podcast, the home for global technology leaders to share insights with the tech community. And a warm welcome to this week's guest, Dr. Akinola Akinyemi, or Akin, as is affectionately known to his good friends. So Akin, you are, in my personal opinion, a very inspiring data leader. You're currently head of data science for IG Group, which is obviously a FTSE 250 organisation, and I'm sure we'll get into a bit about your role there and the really interesting work that you're doing in a while. But let's start with you. You've obviously, I think, had a very interesting route into the world of data science leadership, because over the years you've performed different roles, kind of a test engineer, research engineer, image analysis scientist, and then sort of moving into marketing analytics and that kind of space. So it'd be really great, just sort of hear your journey of how you got into data science and sort of into the position you're in. So yeah, talk us through where did it all begin for you and in your journey into tech and data.
Thanks, Guy. I really appreciate the accolades there. I think IG considers itself FTSE 115, but
Oh, right. Okay, well, I'll take that. That's what it said on LinkedIn, so they need to update LinkedIn.
No index has been made for that just yet. You're either in the hundreds or the 250s. So it's an interesting question. So I before going into university, I actually wanted to be a medical doctor, just like my dad. And I broke my wrist one time, got into A&E, and saw so much blood. I was like, no, this is definitely not for me. And so I think my mom at the time was saying, oh, that there's this whole booming area called like biomedical engineering, because you do like engineering, and maybe there's a day where those two things will meet. So, might as well just, stick with the engineering interest. And so I went into uni, studied electronics engineering with business studies in Glasgow. And you kind of, like, I veered towards like sort of the power engineering specialty in my first 3 years. In fact, worked for E.ON for a bit there as a sort of like Power Academy scholar. And then in my final year, I got into image processing and signal processing as like, really passionate. Did my final year project in that. And when I was graduating, my supervisor at the time told me, I think you're probably best suited to the signal processing stuff. Again, somebody else kind of giving me a steer, but it was really interesting because like images were real. Power is also real, but like images were quite fun, like processing that. And so that's why I got into. I turned down a full-time graduate opportunity with E.ON and took an internship with Freescale Semiconductor as a sort of test engineer working on microcontrollers for the automotive industry. So it was a lot of signal processing. Now, while I was doing that, it was a little bit of a risk, but while I was doing that, came across the engineering doctorate, which was in image analysis for computer vision. And at the time, it just seemed like, wow, this is like pretty cool. Like it's kind of in my interest and something like, a bit of software that I can see. So I applied for it, got the role, and the sort of, I guess that began my journey into the sort of machine learning space. So it was a typical kind of, I guess, machine learning researcher. That's what they call that. Well, today, it was pre the scikit-learns and the open source. I mean, those things were probably there, but for a Japanese company, they wanted everything proprietary. So we had to build a lot of these expectation maximization algorithms, optimization algorithms, decision trees. We built them from scratch. So it required strong, in-depth understanding of what went into those algorithms, but also good software skills to be able to make them, actually run at scale. But thankfully, we had good software engineers, some of the best I've ever worked with, like next to actually turning those things into production. And that's what you call a machine learning engineer today, to be honest. But those things didn't exist. Those roles didn't exist then. So I did that for 4 years and then went into the delivery side of the research for another 3 years because I thought it's quite nice to get offered a job from the same company that sponsored your doctorate. And what that really helped me to do was I always had a passion for understanding how the end product was being used. And so we were building tools that helped make radiologists and cardiologists' lives easier. So can they detect stenosis in the heart quicker than they would normally do using machine learning to identify these stenoses in the cardiac scan, or remove the tissues of interest and focus on where they want to see, kind of augmenting their workflows. So it was really great to see that aspect of it tied to why I was doing what I was doing. So it got to the point where I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to be a cardiologist or whatever, but I figured out I'm actually providing solutions to those guys. So why don't I try this in a different area? And so I went into General Electric as a, call it algorithm software engineer. But it was kind of that ML engineer type thing, because you need to be a strong software engineer with a good understanding of data science. And we're, again, doing similar work there, but their business was pipelines inspections. And so they had reams and reams of data collected every 2 millimeters along a 100-kilometer pipeline. And so some poor analyst has to go through all of that and find out where cracks were. And, I think that it was a very booming business, turning over like $250 million a year still. But, the time it took to inspect a pipeline was around 60 days to turn around, and they had no shortage of incoming work. So it made sense that if you could speed up that time, they could actually capture more business, which is a lot of fun. And so, hey, let's enter sort of machine learning, but it was a complex application of machine learning, because if you have a sort of false negative, i.e. missing a crack or a defect, and that pipeline explodes, you could actually get arrested. There's a liability in there. Now, if you identified a false positive and the operator had to go dig up that spool, which kind of like shuts down operations, costing them around £2 million a day.
Okay.
And they open it and there was no defect in there, you're probably going to lose business, because you're just wasting the money. So it was quite a nice way to sort of balance that error analysis. Now, I did that for a bit, and I really wanted to move to London, somewhere else. And so like I kind of thought, what am I going to do next? And I started looking at jobs and applied for like a machine learning researcher role. Now, the interview was interesting because the people at the interview kind of asked me, like, have you considered applying for a job as a data scientist? It's like, why? It's like, because you haven't actually, a machine learning researcher is inventing new algorithms, like writing the new deep learning framework. So you haven't actually done that in your career, but you've been successful at using those methods to solve problems. And that's actually what, data scientists do. So here's a tip for you. And I was like, you know what? Let me go check Coursera. And I read up, McKinsey had this article of data science, the sexiest job of the 21st century at the time. And I was like, whoa, this could actually be really cool. And I sat in my bed reading this. So I did some courses, the Analytics Edge, which was a 12-week course on edX at the time. And it was like module by module, like, this is exactly what I've been doing for the last 7 years, except that they're giving me tools in R and Python that actually, pretty much make the work easier. Holy crap. So I, picked up some big data Spark skills from a course as well. So I was like, went into study mode, and then started applying for data science jobs. And every time I interviewed for data scientist role, the interviewer always asked me, how do you feel about setting up a team? This happened in three different interviews. I'm like, that's interesting. And so when I applied for the job at IG, I applied for an analytics engineer role, got my contract the next day as a technical team lead to run the team, and so began my sort of journey into the sort of marketing data science space.
Fair enough. Fantastic. That's a really interesting story, actually. And I guess it's a really good point, because, you think about data science as some new sexy terminology. But actually there's a lot of people out there that have had that very kind of analytical mindset and have been solving big problems, in an empirical way using data. Statistics, I guess, that's been around, obviously, applied in real world since kind of the 70s, and computer programming along with it. And obviously there's all these people that have probably been doing the role like yourself, actually, in many ways, but not really aware of that data science title, and then sort of, like say, get drawn to it and realize that's the kind of sweet spot of where they want to go to. But it seems really interesting in your background. One of the sort of core threads I was just thinking when you were sort of talking and describing everything was you seem to be drawn to solving pretty big problems. Is that fair to say? Kind of quite critical problems, obviously in the health tech space, huge problem with a big impact when you get the right solution there. And obviously when you were talking about your the kind of the pipeline and those kind of problems obviously have big impact as well. And I guess further in with IG as well, it's kind of very business critical kind of stuff that big problems to solve. So is the nature of the, obviously different challenges, but is the nature of the problem something you consider when you look to take on a role?
Yeah, I think if I look at my drivers, then there's definitely like impact motive there. And it's sort of the ability to the ability to actually build something that is used and actually has an impact is quite motivating for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess a lot of companies at the moment are, some are a little bit further down the road of their data science journey than others, and quite a few still that we speak to and consult with and partner with are really that sort of fledgling steps of their data science journey and sort of forming that function. And one of the key things that's at the forefront of a lot of data heads of data science that we speak to is like how do we show the value? We kind of believe in what data science can do, and we kind of know what it can do for the business, but how do we share that vision with the rest of the business, and how do we create that value for the business? So I know that's something from conversations you and I have had in the past, that it's something you're particularly passionate about. So it'd be great to understand actually a bit about your approach to IG and kind of how you do that. I mean, IG clearly is a very revered, high profile organization, and I'm sure there probably is quite a lot of expectation around, what data science can do for the business. But how do you approach it there? How do you ensure the data science function, does demonstrate the value you want it to?
I think IG has been an interesting case for us, and it's just a sort of I can kind of like I learned a lot in the journey there that allows me to sort of speak to this from my own sort of perspective, I guess, and also having spoken to other leaders in that space, I can kind of see similarities. So to get value from data, someone showed me a nice sort of pyramid where you started off with big data. Then on top of that was the analytics, and then the sort of data science, machine learning, and then AI at the very top. And the value starts along that chain. So what I found was that companies are at different stages in their journey. Now, some of the biggest gains that I was able to pull out from data was actually constructing big data sets that joined the customer's journey across all marketing touch points and build sort of like marketing attribution. And then now the analytics that came out of that allowed the business to optimize tens of millions of pounds in marketing and use that to guide their investments. That bigger than most sort of like than a machine learning algorithm. There's no machine learning in there. It was just a really complex data set creation problem. But that data set that was created led me to increase my team from a team of me plus 2 others who were kind of focused on building the data set, and one was focused on doing the actual ensuring that we built some dashboards out of it. We now expanded that team to 5 to actually get more hands to extract value from that data set. And so marketing data science was born. We had a good quality, nice, governed, well-documented data set that was powered by Spark, and then lots of analytics coming off of Tableau from there.
Okay.
And so suddenly companies like, okay, right, this is so that value allowed us to grow that function. Now, in other areas, we kind of start building scoring models that were helping us to optimize the call center traffic for sort of new business sales teams, prioritizing calls, that sort of stuff. And so it was quite clear, okay, right, that there's some value in there in that optimize that workflow. So we kind of thought a really good way to maximize or like accelerate the value from the instance was actually to consider the way it's structured in the organization. I was fortunate enough to get the job of actually running that consolidation, hence the sort of, head of data science role, like, subsequently bringing those teams together so that we could genuinely like increase the value that we added to the business.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, interesting. I think it's an interesting point you make at the beginning there when you talk about that kind of tool you built, and how there's no kind of necessarily machine learning in there, but it's a tool that still has created a lot of value. And I think that's interesting to get your take on that. I think that's still probably a preconception in the market, or maybe a level of naivety, I think, from companies to a degree, where they're like, well, hang on a minute, we need to just sprinkle a load of machine learning on this and turn it into something absolutely magical, when actually very often it's not the solution that's needed for the problem at hand. So kind of picking the right tool, pragmatically, or the right approach pragmatically to the job at hand. And it's interesting, we talked about being able to scale the team from 2 to 5 because of the value that you created with that. And how do you go about, how do you best structure a data science team, in your opinion, to continue to deliver that value? Are there any particular kind of systems or approaches that you take for structuring and kind of scaling teams?
So there's lots of literature in there, and I was quite obsessed with that, with that problem, because for me, I thought the right setup would maximize value. And so we went from a kind of, marketing data science was embedded in marketing, and it actually allowed like really, really good, partnership with marketing, building something that was data science that was domain specific in there. But then we had other kind of data science teams or analytics teams or data science teams kind of spotted in other verticals in the business. Now, what ended up happening was that we realized that some teams, like there was a kind of not really a balanced skill set across the different data teams, across the different quote unquote data science teams. Some kind of had, lots of machine learning engineers or data engineers, but no like core, so analytical data scientists. Some had a lot of pure data scientists, but no one with an engineering background that could actually take those things into operation. And so you you felt like there was, and so that was one problem. Second problem was that the business, some of these areas kind of overlapped. Where does marketing data science and client data science, where does this work actually stop? And so from the business perspective, they really couldn't understand, who do I go to with a problem that required, a data science solution? And it was quite unclear to them. And obviously, as a sort of business that was kind of growing in the data science capability, having this kind of federated structure, where the structure didn't actually allow you to build the skill or build the discipline as effectively as you would. And so we kind of thought, okay, let's go for, because of the level of maturity and the kind of difference in skills so we've got around, why don't we go for a centralized hub and spoke approach, whereby we put the team together into one center of excellence. And, we now have analytics teams that are embedded in different parts of the business. So in marketing, in finance, in the dealing side, in compliance, etc. And partner with those guys because they have the business knowledge and they have the statistics and the sort of analysis knowledge, but maybe lack the specialized, machine learning skills and, the sort of advanced that, we can bring to the science. But if you create a squad with those people and then you're able to solve problems in a variety of business areas.
Interesting. Yeah.
And have enough kind of leverage to be able to grow, and figure out how do we build the skills in this team. So now I split the teams into the different disciplines that make up data science. So rather than looking for unicorns, I built a department that was the unicorn. And so I have a business intelligence analyst teams made up of data storytellers, core data science team made up purely of the sort of predictive analytics heads, and then a machine learning engineering team. And so within that kind of COE, we can kind of work as an internal consultancy and service different areas of the business that way. That really works
Mm.
at the moment because the business knows where to come to for problems. We've actually seen that the value that we've generated to the business has increased. We're able to come up with shared vision, shared set of objectives, work like that. Will that be the same format 3 years from now? I don't think so.
Okay.
But for now, it works.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach, and yeah, totally get that. It feels very logical. Yeah, that's one of the really interesting things about data science. Obviously, it is this huge umbrella, isn't it? It sits across a lot of different disciplines and technologies and techniques, and you know, everybody that enters into the world of data science, there's a little bit of a Venn diagram, I guess, between probably the more classical BI side, maybe a bit of the kind of analytics, the data engineering, and the machine learning piece. And they obviously align to certain pillars more than others, or have a particular passion or just a particular aptitude for certain areas more than others. So yeah, I think that's a really logical approach, and I think the great thing I like about that is that the business knows where to go to get their problem solved. So obviously they clearly buy into that approach as well, because they're seeing the value off the back of it. Interesting you say that you sort of that it may evolve as time goes on. How do you feel that may happen?
So what I've seen is, internally, when we created this structure, we had to now decide what was the focus. And the data scientist, the focus was machine learning and like advanced, like statistical predictive analytics, that sort of stuff. And we created an MLOps function, system engineering team. But as that journey progressed over 3 years, we had to, we were still in the early stages. We were still doing a lot of data engineering pieces. We were doing a lot of analysis pieces and stuff. So as time evolved, like we grew a bigger marketing intelligence or marketing analytics function in the business that went up from a team of 2 to about 18 people, sucking up a lot of the core analysis work that we used to do. We handed over anything that was not deemed that kind of specialist, or we wanted to focus on to more analytics teams. We handed over a lot of the valuable pieces that I thought at the start, which was the big data, thing for marketing attribution, handed that over to data engineering and a lot of other big things like that, kind of allowing us to say right now, what do we focus on, right? And so it's MLOps, so specialists like that. So the growing of these other functions around the business kind of means that, you can start to see that, well, actually, that federated or embedded approach to analytics is definitely getting stronger as those teams are more capable. One, the rise of, no code, sort of auto ML, the empowerment of the citizen data science is coming up with companies like Data Robot leading the charge in these things, right? Now you can conceivably see that those analytics teams can do a majority of the simple data science problems with the right tools, with the right platforms, if you just set up enablement for them. But somebody has to build that enablement. And that's where your COE will end up specializing in going forward. I don't think it's a thing that, that thing will never exist, but you constantly, what the focus on will be changing over time, and will not necessarily need to expand functionality. So those kind of trends, I think, are the stuff that makes me believe that the future will look very different.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. And I think it's a really pragmatic way to look at things, to feel actually, it's an ever evolving space, isn't it? Probably exponentially quicker than other areas of technology. So to kind of have that mindset of actually, this works for us right here, right now, but as things evolve, we may have to do and adapt and sort of take that iterative approach to how you scale a team. I think it's obviously a great quality of a very aware leader. One question around the kind of hub and spoke model that you spoke about, logically makes absolute sense. How, as a leader, when you kind of have a slightly, I guess you've got the hub, but maybe working on slightly different focuses or people with slightly different angles and projects that they're working on. How do you go about creating a unifying culture within a team that maybe has slightly different objectives? How do you kind of keep that hub as a data science hub that has that culture that you want when they're perhaps one of the spokes?
It's very challenging. I think I'll focus on the hub because that's what I can control. The spoke is it's a lot harder, and like maybe that's outside the sort of locus of control here. The hub is challenging in itself because you have a team of teams that tend to focus on their own sort of deliveries. And so what I found like it good to do at the very start was to kind of come up with collaboratively come up with a vision, a set of objectives for the wider department. One. And we all agree that this is what we want to focus on. And that actually allows us to focus on value and focus on the things that matter. That's served us up well up until now. But then the people challenges started to kind of surface when you become aware that a team of teams can either really be a meeting or a team. That distinction is quite subtle. Each person maybe reports into me, and I report to the next person, but they don't necessarily function. That first team doesn't necessarily function as a team. And so to create that change is something I've been working on really consciously in the last 6 to 8 months. It's giving my first team, my data science leadership team, tasks to focus on as a team. So me being a member of that team, rank aside, and we're solving problems for the wider department. So take your day job aside, but we're actually looking at things that propel the department as a whole forward. And that leadership team now becomes a team that's focusing on specific problems. That's building that relationship between each of them. So it doesn't have to rely on that kind of graph that goes through me, but they can kind of work together like that. I think that's sort of proving to be promising. But it's one that requires a lot of consciousness as a leader that I don't get in the way of that collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess in any leadership position, it fundamentally all boils down to people, doesn't it? And kind of relationships and how do you most effectively, ensure the job gets done, but still build that culture where people have the opportunity to build those strong relationships internally, and that's the job of a leader, which sometimes is, well, very often not easy. But no, it makes total sense, and really respect and kind of buy into your approach. So let's talk a little bit about some of the trends then. I guess we talked about how kind of data science is evolving. Totally agree. The kind of ML operations space is very hot potato for a lot of businesses. But what areas of data science, are you most passionate about moving forward? And what are the exciting trends, I guess, that you kind of see coming down the pipeline that you're really, really intrigued with?
So I think there's a few things. MLOps for me was the best thing since sliced bread because it just made sense. And I know that's been kind of growing since 2019. And, it's something that I tried to get a handle on and just recently finally kind of, think I nailed it. But, that's that sort of industrialization of data science, is the thing that I'm really excited about. And you've seen leaders in that space being able to kind of capture value by automating a lot of stuff and creating that kind of best practice for machine learning. I think it's easy to succeed in machine learning by chance and have one or two kind of, booms in there, but to make it a consistent approach, that is magical. And so MLOps exciting there. Looking at the kind of value, the chain and sort of producing, let's focus on machine learning for now. Data prep, model building, operationalization. Find that actually in the operationalization space, MLOps has come into kind of optimize that space, that area, which typically maybe would have taken 40% of your time. 20% of the time is actually in the model building. And so AutoML, quite interesting trends there that, you can get started with a nice baseline model using AutoML. And like, if you're leveraging best in class stuff from, say, Google, the data robots, whatever, then, you should really, really use it. And it requires a mindset shift to be able to start from there. Not very appealing to the kind of data scientist who feels that their value is in, writing everything from scratch. But for a head of data science whose job is to generate value for the business and also keep the team inspired, you have to play a balancing act in there, how you pick these things. But then data prep, now that the rise of the analytic engineer is one to watch. Like, a lot of time is spent in preparing these data sets for analysis. And sometimes even in analytics teams claim that 80% of their time is spent in data prep cleaning. Now, tools of, best practices have been created right now, like with the rise of things like DBT, the modern data stack, data meshes, all of those sort of things, where you can conceivably create. It's basically taken what we were doing in the past and called data silos and actually said, there's a reason those silos were created. And trying to figure out a way to adopt that and stop trying to say, oh no, everything must be centralized, and just, allow it to happen, but with best practices in there. So I don't think it's been nailed in practice. I just certainly haven't seen it, being done properly yet but it's something that I believe if you get that right and you're able to create these data assets that are now available for analytics, for insights, for dashboarding, for machine learning, whatever, then you're going to shrink that time, and like, so speed to insight increases. The variety of data that goes into your machine learning models increases because suddenly you're able to, access data sets created by a risk team or by the dealing team or whatever. So I think that trend is one that is like, is one that is exciting to watch, that will completely kind of give us a step change in the way we carry out data science. Those are the two big. I'm not going to go into the sort of like, the big fancy AI things that are coming out, like your generative AI, like ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff. But it wouldn't be a podcast in 2023 without mentioning those things. I think just trying to like understand, for me, the risk inherent in just allowing anyone in an organization to access these things. OpenAI is getting access to lots of privileged information right now in the boom and access without even asking for it. So I think companies need to be careful as to how they're allowing their employees access these things, and put some controls in place before they sort of let out all their trade secrets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it wouldn't be a podcast talking about trends in data science and AI, I guess, unless ChatGPT was chucked in there somewhere. But no, I totally agree, and I think the AutoML piece, it kind of echoes a little bit of, there's always that sort of reticence or reluctance a little bit to go with the the kind of black box sort of pre-packaged platform, and I think there's still that kind of with ChatGPT at the moment, that sort of how should we say, lack of trust around it. But yeah, it's certainly been a watershed moment around the generative AI side, hasn't it? It'll be interesting to see how that kind of does develop. Microsoft certainly seems to be very interested with their kind of latest contracts that they've written up with them. But no, I totally agree around the the analytics stuff as well. So I think there's some really interesting trends to keep an eye on. Yeah, fantastic. Well, Akin, I've really enjoyed the chat. I think it's been a really insightful conversation, and I can certainly see how you've achieved what you've achieved at IG, and why you've been so successful. And I'm sure many great things to come in future. And I always like to end podcasts with an idea I stole from a guy called Rich Reed, who wrote a book called If I Could Tell You One Thing, where he went around to loads of famous people and asked for their one favorite piece of advice to kind of share with their their fellow humankind. So yeah, I'd like to ask you the same question, if I may. Have you got a particular, one takeaway, your favorite piece of advice maybe you've ever received that you'd like to share?
Oh, that's tough. Like I came into this podcast thinking, what would that be? Because I heard that somewhere else in us, and it's like, but I'll stick to one just because it's the thing that comes to top of my mind. Not that, if I slept on this, I may have another answer tomorrow. But like an old sort of like mentor of mine kind of told me that, when you start up in a role, like, you should make yourself indispensable. But in order to be promoted, you kind of need to make yourself dispensable. Now, that kind of stuck with me because what it allows it to do, what it allows me to do consciously is to empower people and, to solve bigger problems. So the term promoter is not necessarily it's not necessarily a sort of like this rise in career. It's to be able to kind of do the things that you want to do, or, or grow as an individual. So in order to grow as an individual, you kind of need to give up something. And so I sit in company, and since getting that advice 2018, I haven't written a line of code at work. I still do my Coursera stuff at home and put things in there, but I'm now able to focus on, bigger problems, like how are we structuring the organization data science actually have value? How do you like get the best out of your people? Things that nobody else needs to worry about. And then, getting the best out of the people that work for me, and allowing them to kind of, also achieve that growth.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great piece of advice, because I think you carry that kind of mindset. You can tell why you've been such a successful data leader, because that kind of mindset empowers you to, or allows you to empower the people to kind of solve problems without your ongoing input, but still infers, a level of, like, say, aspiration to go and achieve bigger things and solve bigger problems further up. And certainly as a leader, it's very easy sometimes, isn't it, to get stuck in the weeds and do for people rather than empowering them to actually find the solution. But if you ever really want to kind of go on and achieve, you have to make sure that every level that you're kind of leaving to its own devices is fully ready for that challenge. And that's what enables you to, like, say, do yourself out of a job to go and take the next bigger challenge that comes along. So I love that. I think that's a really great piece of advice. Fantastic. Well, look, Akin, really great to speak with you. Thanks again for coming on, being a great guest. And I will keep my eyes very closely on your future progress at IG, and I'm sure your next, all your other accolades in your sporting world as well, with your running. So I look forward to your next half marathon efforts when that comes through. But yeah, thanks again for taking part, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Guy. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for giving the space to talk about all these things. Great questions. Happy to sort of do this again sometime.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. Cool. Bye for now.
See ya.